what am I eating now? How many calories is that? Am I going to get fat from that? How am I going to lose weight? Like, how can I look better? It was just like this constant conversation that was always on in my head. And I had done like diet pills in college.
Our collective relationship with food. We live in a time of fractured ideologies and lots of health misinformation, and on social media, fear-mongering left and right about what we should or shouldn't be eating. So how does somebody, given the complexity of the food environment and, you know, the messaging, socioeconomic messaging and body image stuff that we see on social media now, which is pervasive, how does somebody heal their relationship with food?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty complex question, but whenever we look at everything that's going on in the landscape today as far as it relates to food and nutrition and exercise even, we can look at all of the resources that we have, all the information. People don't need more information. We need to understand why. Why are people over consuming food? Why are people not working out? Why are people working out too much? What is the actual reasoning of why we're doing the things that we're doing? What is driving us as humans? And I'm someone that struggled with my body for a long time. I had disordered eating. I was, I've been up, I've been down, and I've been in a pretty bad place. And I think a lot of women in our culture have struggled as well. There is so much messaging out there, and women today have so much body dysmorphia, it's really hard. So what I found over time was that in my own body journey, I had to figure out the reasoning of why I was binge eating, as an example. And when I was going to therapy and when I was really figuring out the emotions behind it, because when you're someone that has an eating disorder or binge eats, it's not just you having more information. You actually are doing these things for a reason. So in my therapy work, I discovered this psychotherapy technique called internal family systems. And internal family systems was created by this psychotherapist called Richard Schwartz. And he realized through his work with patients that had eating disorders that there was these common trends that were happening. And what was happening in the case of someone that binges, as an example, or someone that has an eating disorder, is that they know what to do to be well. They know they need to eat avocados, blueberries, steak, all of the things. But then there's a part of them that's like taking over almost, or there's another aspect of them that drives them to binge or have eating disorders or overeat or do anything that's disordered with food. And so when we can actually separate those two aspects of ourselves and really get to know those two parts, it's parts work essentially, we can really get to know what's driving us to do the things that are harmful to our health. So for me with the binger, if we're actually going to get to know that binging part of me that takes over when I would have a binge, or the part of you that takes over that keeps you from eating well or makes you overeat or makes you overconsume, you can see that there's an aspect of your personality that's actually doing this because they think it's helpful for you. So there's a part of my binging, there's a part of people's overeating that is actually serving them in a really weird way. So we think that it's all negative when we overeat. We think that it's all something that's bad. And from a health perspective, it normally is. It provides so much strain on our bodies. It's so harmful to our health. But from an emotional perspective, it's serving us. So for me, my binging was soothing. It was helping me regulate. It was helping me relax. It was something I could always go to for dopamine and pleasure. And when you're someone that's incredibly stressed and you don't know how to regulate your own emotions, food is a really beautiful thing. Food is an incredible thing. So for a lot of us that didn't have the healthy regulating with our parents or people from the outside, we can use food to regulate. So I would be in a situation where I'd be incredibly stressed out. And what I would do is a part of me would come forward and be like, I know what to do to calm down or de-stress or be chill or regulate, eat food. And then that part of me would take over and I would binge. So in the conversation around food and around health and wellness, when we can really understand the ways in which food is serving us, or over-consuming food or eating really fatty foods or eating really shit foods is serving us to soothe, to keep us from boredom, to make us check out, to be something that's going to help calm our nervous system in a weird way, we can really understand and go to like, what could I do instead of that things? What can I do instead of binging? What can I do instead of overeating that's going to help me to soothe or feel better?
Wow. What did a typical binge look like for you?
My binges. So my binge game, it's crazy because I was also someone that would binge when I also started to learn about health and wellness. So it was kind of like orthorexia binge. So I would do like an entire jar of peanut butter or like 12 Quest bars in a day, or like, yeah, it was like all healthy stuff, but it was just mass quantities. And it would just be like, it would usually be at a time and point where I had so much going on in my life, or I felt so overwhelmed, and I just wanted a break. I wanted to like find a space and place where I could relax, where I could check out, where I could just like put in all of this energy and stress that I didn't know what else to do with. I didn't know how to soothe myself outside of using food.
Wow. And was there a familial component? Like,
Yeah.
did your mom talk about food in the house
Yeah.
in a way that was, maybe counterproductive to a good relationship with food?
Yeah, I want to talk about yours too, how yours was, because I know you have a great relationship with food. But I think for a lot of women that are listening, the relationship between mother and daughter is often different than with mother and boys. For women that grew up in households with sisters or just with their mothers that were around, you are modeling all of your food relationships and your body relationships from what your mother's doing. So for me, I was watching my mother complain about her weight. I was watching my mother eat really low fat foods. I was watching her restrict her calories. I was watching her just kind of complain about her body all the time. And then she would also kind of do those things to me. It was always about how you looked. It was always about if you were thin. It was always about if you were pretty or attractive. And so that became a way that the younger version of me had to figure out how to be loved. So I understand that in order to be loved, I have to be thin. In order to be loved, I have to be perfect. In order to be loved, I have to be pretty. So that part of us, unless it's healed, will be running the show until we figure it out. So for me, there was a younger version of me that was sort of running in the back of my mind that was like, okay, I have to be thin. I have to be pretty. I have to be all these things. But I also don't know how to soothe myself, so I'm going to binge.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, I grew up, my mom never really talked about her weight.
Wow. You're 3 boys though.
3 boys.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my mom always, I mean, from my vantage point, always had a healthy relationship with food.
She's beautiful.
Yeah, she was beautiful.
She's so beautiful, babe.
Yeah. And
Stunning.
she was. My mom was kind of a
She was
kind of a babe. She was definitely a babe. Yeah.
She was a babe.
She modeled.
Of course.
Not like professionally, but growing up, she definitely had like
hand model.
I think what they were called like hand model. She had like I guess comp cards around the house. Like in her youth, she did some like test shoots. With photographers, and I mean she was always very beautiful, but never always seemingly had a healthy relationship with food. I never saw her restricting. She was not really much of a dieter.
Wow.
She never really exercised, but I think that was more of a generational thing.
100%. It was like, yeah, you didn't really exercise that way. I mean, good for her, because I feel like for a lot of my mom's generation and the generation of a lot of women that I know that struggle with food and body, you can either get it from your household or you're going to get it potentially from media or other women. Because what's being told in the media, especially growing up, was shows like Friends, where they are absolute rails, just like not eating at all. And that's like how you be accepted. Or you could be around other women, and other women oftentimes can judge or critique or shame or kind of like be competitive with women in a lot of different ways. So there's just so much messaging that women can get around it. But I think most of it starts in the household. And for me, it was really something where I learned from a young age that being thin and looking a certain way equated love and success. And so I needed to figure out as I got older, like, how could I love myself? How could I see myself as successful? How could I see myself as worthy outside of it being defined by my body and how much I weighed? And so you have to discover those ways. Like, how can I learn to love myself outside of these ways that I've learned to love myself my entire life? And for a lot of women that are potentially listening, most of them have this complex relationship with food, this complex relationship with working out, where it's not something that is really easy. Like, it's very layered. Women want to look a certain way, and women feel like they have to look a certain way. And it sometimes can be really hard.
Yeah, and in the 90s gave rise to the waif-like model, right? Like Kate Moss and all these other figures that were very thin.
Yeah, that was the whole time of nothing tastes as good as skinny feels.
Yeah, that was famous Kate Moss.
The famous Kate Moss quote, which is so great. I mean, that was like ultra thin was huge. Like, and I don't know if we've swung too far the other way, like who knows? But I think when you're a young girl and you look at that messaging, you can't help but think that there's something wrong with you if you don't look that certain way and that you're having a problem. But I think for most of us, we really need to address the emotions behind it, the emotions behind why we're doing what we're doing. And especially women as communal creatures, we're relational creatures. We want to connect. Like that's how we like survive. So if our emotions are out of whack or we perceive others to not like us for how we look, we're just going to spiral. Like we're not going to be able to function. Whereas men can be a little bit more independent in their eating and nutrition because they're going out to hunt, you know, from a history perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. Was there a point in your life at which point you realized you had a problem?
Yeah, there was one. So I knew my whole life, like it was really just, I had a constant conversation in my head about it where it was just like, okay, what am I eating now? How many calories is that? Am I going to get fat from that? How am I going to lose weight? Like, how can I look better? It was just like this constant conversation that was always on in my head. And I had done like diet pills in college. I had done diet pills in high school. I had done every diet under the sun, Special K, grapefruit, you know, Master Cleanse, like Weight Watchers. I drank Ensure shakes. Like you just do all the things. Like a lot of the women that I know also have done all the things in our quest to be like so little. But there was a point in time where I was on a trip in Mexico, and this was in college, and maybe a little bit after. And I had heard in the news that thyroid medication helped you lose weight. Because Lady Gaga lost a lot of weight, and I heard that she lost it through a thyroid medication. In Mexico, you can get whatever you want.
Oh, no.
So I'm at this pharmacy in Mexico buying a year's worth of thyroid medication.
No.
Yes.
Okay.
They're like, how many milligrams do you normally take? I was like, 50. And they're like, perfect. I was like, fuck yeah. I was like, yes, I got 50. So I had a year's worth of this medication, and I was just on the flight home, and I'm like, this just feels a little too much. Like this just feels a little too much. And I never ended up taking the medication. It never ended up happening. But I was like, yo, what is going on? Like this is just too much. And I knew that I had to do something. So I really made it my priority through my spiritual practice, through my therapy, just in my life to really figure it out. And what also helped me not focus on my body so much was finding my purpose and like actually focusing on other things outside of how we look. And I think for a lot of women, when you don't have a purpose or you don't feel like called to something, like you have this amazing business that you love, when you feel like there's no point, you're like, I hate my job, my relationships aren't fulfilling, life isn't that good, I should focus on my body because maybe that will be better. And when I found a job that I loved and I was able to do what I loved, I'm like, even if my body isn't perfect right now, like I love what I do, and that's so fulfilling for me.
Yeah, it's like when the more chaotic and uncontrollable and unpredictable the outside world becomes,
Yes.
the more people tend to hunker down on what they can control.
Yes.
And I think for many people, it's what they're putting in their mouths.
Yeah. And that's, you know, if we think about that just from the highest level, that's codependency in a lot of ways. Because if you're waiting for everything around you to calm down before you're calm, if you're waiting for everything to chill before you're chill, if you're waiting for the chaos of the outside world to dictate if you're going to be calm or not, you're never going to be calm, because you need to figure out how you can be calm, centered, at peace by yourself, regardless of what's going on in the world. But I do feel like when a lot of people want to find a space to control, it's food. But eventually for a lot of people, it goes from one extreme to the other. That's why diets fail. Like if we think about most diets fail. If you think about a diet, it fails because most people aren't addressing the emotional causes of the issue. That a lot of people use food to soothe. A lot of people use food for the dopamine response. A lot of people use food within enmeshed family systems. Like there's so much more than I think what we look at on the surface as people having more information. Like everyone has enough information. It's how are they motivated to make change in their life? Is it something that's emotional? Is it something that's psychological? How can we get people to really instill change and motivate them?
Yeah, you're so right. At what point does a passion though cross over and become an unhealthy obsession? Because like,
Say more.
I think about food all the time. Like I'm incredibly passionate.
My boy thinks about food.
Yeah, I think about, and I'm thinking about like my protein needs throughout the day, but I love it. Like I wouldn't want to change a thing.
Yes.
Like I'm thinking about protein all day long. I'm thinking about like how I can optimize the workout that I'm going to have later with food.
How many grams of protein do you have a day? I forgot.
I try to have, I'm trying to hit
200?
No, not quite 200. Although some days when I was like, earlier this year, I did a little bit of a cut. So I was like dieting deliberately to get to about 9% body fat, which I did. I got like really shredded. Yeah, I got really shredded. So I was like,
why do you have your shirt on right now?
I should
podcast about your shirt.
Yeah, that'd be a genius.
I'm like, yeah, literally.
No, I intentionally wanted to get really lean because I'd never done that. And I just wanted to understand the science of the applied science, like the practical applications of everything that I knew about fat loss and muscle preservation while in a calorie deficit. And so I did that and I got really lean. And in the process which is fairly atypical, I got stronger. I think I even put on some muscle.
Wow.
But for me, it was like a fun self-experiment, and so, I love it.
Yeah. I think that's an amazing point and question and something that's actually really important in this. And I think something to think about in the self-development space or in the personal growth space or in the health and wellness space is what is your motivation for doing what you're doing? Is it because you hate yourself or is it because you love yourself?
Yes.
So in your case, you're motivated by a genuine curiosity and love for yourself. Oh my God, I love how fit I feel. I love how it feels to eat protein. I love how it feels to work out. Like, what more is there? You're excited. You're like, oh yeah, like, let's see what's possible. Let's see what we can do. But for a lot of people, they're motivating themselves by hate. I hate that I look this way. It disgusts me that my clothes fit like this. It disgusts me that I weigh this much. I'm going to work out 100 times this week because I want to change myself. So with everything, it's really, really getting truthful and mindful about our intention behind things. Like there is a really beautiful altruistic intention to have really good health, to have longevity, to love your body. But we have to just be mindful of the energetics of like that's motivating what we do.
Absolutely. Do it. Approach it from a place of love.
Yes. And yours is like, and there's in such a beauty, like I feel so great in my body. I feel so happy with my relationship, with my health. And I just feel so healthy and vital. And now it is fun. You're like, now I'm lifting a lot more and I'm like, oh my God, like what can I do? Like now I'm getting strong. And it's like so interesting. But if you literally are like, you are a piece of shit and because you look this way, it's you suck and you need to work out more, you need to do these things. It's just a totally different game.
Yeah, you're so right. What role do you think social media is playing in all this? There's a lot of fear mongering now that takes place on social media amongst wellness influencers and health experts alike. And, obviously you have the media's portrayal of certain body types. But yeah, on social media, do you think social media is helping or making things worse?
It's really hard to say because on the one hand, if we think positively, I think people have so much more access to information. I think people are over therapizing everything. I think everyone is walking around being like, I'm insecure attachment and I'm a projector and you know what I mean? Everyone's just kind of like diagnosing themselves and just going crazy. And even with nutrition and wellness, there's so much information that it's hard to disseminate that the overwhelm can cause people to freeze. But then they also have more access to more body types, more people that look different than them, more information that is positive. They have more access to really positive parts of the internet. And I feel like, I don't know if you have this, but because of my algorithm that's been created through my various habits over time, I have a really positive experience on the internet. Like the internet is the algorithm of your brain, essentially. It's watching what you're doing. So if you're doing and looking at stuff that's negative repeatedly, it's going to keep serving you that. So I have a really beautiful experience looking at what's on the internet. But I think overall, probably a negative, to women, especially with Facetune, especially with editing, especially with all there is possible to alter what you do and what you look like. And I think too, there's this thing that like there's a part of our brain that gets so easily fixated, especially for men, on certain body types, women with big tits, women with big asses. Like it's easy because it's hitting on that primal aspect of a man's brain to see that, and you see that online and then you like it. It's kind of like the body type that like gets the clicks or whatever. And so it's really changing and altering what we're attracted to. in the 90s, it was like the waif thin woman. And now it's kind of like the Bugs Life character of like this woman that has these exaggerated features, big lips, big whatever. And so it's really changing what we're only attracted to. So then women are looking at that like, is that something that I need to do? So I think it can be confusing and overwhelming, but I think overall it's probably net negative if we really think about it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean,
and what's the experience like for a man? Like, do you see men's bodies, and are you thinking about men's bodies?
yeah, body dysmorphia is a real thing, and I think this is why I'm so interested to know where the delineation is between a quote unquote healthy level of body dysmorphia, if such a thing exists.
Okay, say more.
And a pathologic level. Well, because I think it's
like motivating.
If you're approaching your fitness from a place of love, but you have certain body composition goals, seeing your body change, that's not always easy to perceive, because it's like watching a plant grow. You can't always perceive the change. That's why, a lot of people will take before and after photos. And, I'm very invested and interested in my body composition from just a general fascination standpoint, from an applied science standpoint. But there is a degree of body dysmorphia that I think, that can be harnessed in a productive way. Yeah. Again, assuming that it doesn't cross over into wherever that line exists between a healthy or manageable or productive level to a pathologic level. I'm always inspired to get better and to improve, like the same way that I am with anything. Like people listening to this podcast might think Max is a fantastic interviewer, but I listen to it and I'm like, I listen with a critical lens.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm like, where can I improve as an interviewer, as a host? And so I think there's a certain degree of like self-criticism that's actually productive, that compels you forward.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I think when you have like a confidence in yourself, and from an IFS, which is the internal family systems, you have that self. And the self is like the most true, genuine version of you. When you have a sense of self and confidence, you can go to your interview and be like, oh yeah, I believe I'm a good interviewer, but that one wasn't my best. I was a little tired. I wasn't sharp. I didn't do my nicotine before, like I wasn't doing my thing. And that I have that as well. And that's what makes you great at what you do. But you're also not going to the interview that you heard and you're like, yo, that interview sucks. I should never do it again. Like I'm the worst in, you know what I mean? It's actually using stuff constructively, loving yourself enough to know like, no, I'm a good interviewer, but that wasn't my best. And that is really a huge component of self-love, is being able to be like, I love myself enough to trust myself, and I love myself enough to like be better and like be friends with that future version of myself, and be like, no, I love myself so much that I know I'm capable of more, whether it's in my life, whether it's in my business, whether it's in my body. But we have to be so mindful, because oftentimes it's like a razor thin line of like, do you hate yourself or do you love yourself? That's motivating you. Yeah.
And I think curating your social media algorithm as best you can to not present you images that are triggering or harmful, I think that's
huge.
I think that's super smart. Yeah, I go into my Explore page on a regular basis, and it's shocking sometimes the things that are presented to me.
I know.
And I take the time to actually like long tap on the things that I don't want to see more of, and I go to not interested.
I love that. That's so powerful.
I try not to like go into like the hot Instagram girls. Like I try to keep that very far from my purview, because I think that short circuits my male brain.
I completely agree.
I
feel bad for y'all. I mean, honestly, I feel bad for myself, and I feel bad for y'all, because it is crazy when you see the Explore feed. I'm like, how are there so many beautiful women in the world?
It's all fake.
It's all fake. But I'm just like, wait, where'd you come from? And you exist, and you exist. I'm like, what? I thought, and it's so overwhelming.
Yeah. And it's fake on the front end, and it's fake on the back. Like it's fake in the sense that like, obviously there's like women now, just the widespread use of plastic surgery
it's so crazy,
and makeup and all that stuff. And from a male perspective, and also for women, there's like the use of performance enhancing drugs, right, to like augment physiques and whatever. But then on the back end, it's like you're only seeing the best of the best photos. And even those photos are filtered and run through myriad like now AI processing and the like.
It's like a whole persona, you know what I mean? Like it's crazy. I thought about that recently. I'm like, okay. And I think about that with my own social media, like there is an aspect of me, because of the way that I grew up, because my parents were like, you have to be attractive or you have to look a certain way. There is still that part of me, and it's a part that's like, I need on social media to be always seen as attractive. And I think that's honestly like held me back a little bit, because I feel like if you're always someone that and I'm not insane, obviously, like I'm very balanced in this, but there is a part of me that's like, I don't want to post a picture where I look bad. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to post a picture of my double chin or whatever it is that's happening, which is a part. But then again, too, there's another aspect too, where it's like, why do we feel like we have to post every single second of our experience in life and all things? So if I'm honestly thinking like, okay, I want to post only good pictures of me, why don't you want to post bad pictures? It's also like, well, can I not have my phone on me all the time? Can I not like post every experience I've ever had? And I think we're just sharing more and more online that it's just becoming this thing where it's like, what is the real life and what is social media?
Yeah. It's this hyper curated, hyper stylized, hyper realized version of reality that just doesn't exist in actuality.
Yeah. And people spend so much of their time trying to figure out how to portray their life online rather than living it.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, think about how much strategy is put in place for a lot of people when they're trying to portray their life in a certain way. Okay, we're going to go here and we're going to do this and we're going to do this. It's been very interesting because I've noticed recently with my friends and even people that we talk to on a daily basis, the conversation is always kind of funneling to social media now. Like, I have a hard time being in a space without some conversation around social media being brought into the room. And I think it's such a massive aspect of our lives and we can't really get away from it, it seems like.
Yeah. I want to use it less.
Yeah. How much are you on? I have someone that does mine now.
You do?
You should.
Wow.
It's
smart.
changed the game.
Really?
There is an aspect where I don't feel as connected to what my friends are doing, but I also don't think that looking at their stories makes us connected. You know what I mean?
That's
I'm
a
like,
great point.
That's not connection. Like, what I'm sharing on my stories is not what I'm talking to my friends about in person.
Yeah.
It's my business. It's what I'm wanting to portray. But like, if you want to really get to know what's going on with my life, we're having a conversation. So there's an aspect where I do feel a little bit out of the loop, but then again, I feel so much more free and I feel so much more creative and less confused. Because each time we're looking at something on social media, our brain likes to compare by necessity. What it's doing is doing something natural. I'm looking at this picture of this girl and my brain is saying, is she taller than me? Is she shorter than me? It is a function of organization for the brain to understand how this person compares to me. But what's the problem with it is the stories we apply to that. So this woman is taller than me, she's thinner than me, she's prettier than me, whatever. Then the story that I'm telling myself which is where we get in trouble, is that she's better than me, she's, got a better life than me, she's prettier than me. Like, we have to be careful of like not just looking at the amount of information that our brain is processing, but the stories that we're attaching to all the information that we're seeing online.
Yeah, it's so true. Comparison is the thief of joy.
I know.
I love that line. I mean, I if you go to my Explore page, I mean, it's.
I also think expectations are. But continue.
Yeah. Well, my Explore page, I was going to say, it's a combination of like really jacked dudes.
I was going to say.
Yeah, it's super jacked. But the thing is,
you'd be like, is he straight?
I don't know, but I don't compare myself to the, I tend to take inspiration, like inspo from them. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I guess it's like, again, I think
Do you compare yourself to anybody?
No, not really.
Compare yourself to your best version.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I've never been into team sports. I don't like comparing myself. I have like a visceral repulsion from comparing myself to others. Like I like comparing myself to how I was yesterday.
Yeah.
And a year prior.
Yeah.
And 10 years prior.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like the inspo. I like working out at gyms where there's fit people. Mm-hmm. Working out so that I can draw inspiration from that. It's like motivating.
It's nice. And that's, I think, too, what can happen is in doses, that can be motivating. But over time, it can become overwhelming,
Yeah.
But I think also you get used to it. Like living in Los Angeles, it's like, the best of the best, the most beautiful people in the world. But you just got to get used to it after a while. You're like, oh, yeah, this is what everyone looks like.
Well, I guess I also come to it from a place of understanding that like most of the people, 99% of the guys in my peer group online who are more jacked than me are likely using some form of TRT.
I hear you. And that's exactly. So, but then we're like, that's what happens, even with women. It's like if I look at a picture of a hot girl, then I'll be like, well, you know, she's got so much plastic surgery and she's using filters and da-da-da-da. It's like, but then we have this whole narrative and conversation where we're negating someone we don't even really know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just kind of what I always think about is like the psychic debris that social media causes.
Ooh, the psychic debris.
Yes, where it's like you look at that guy and you're like, you don't think a lot is happening, but there's a lot happening. You're looking at it, you're processing where he is, what he's doing, what he's wearing. Oh yeah, he's probably on TRT. Yeah, I've seen that guy. I know who he talks to. He does this thing. And that's happening in seconds. And we don't even really think about it. And it can just be something that gets really sticky. So you get off your phone and you're like, whoa, okay, back to reality, what's going on? And it just can like stick in our subconscious, I think, a little bit more than we think.
Is there a difference between having an eating disorder and disordered eating? Yeah,
there is. I would say that I'm not the total expert in this space. I would say it's one of those things that like I never really understood if I had an eating disorder or disordered eating, because I'm someone that for so much of my life would like negate my experience. I think when you've had trauma, big T trauma or little T trauma, you oftentimes like negate what's happening. You're like, no, this is normal. Like, and when you're in your own experience growing up your entire life, you see what you're experiencing as reality. Oh, everyone has a mom that says this. Everyone has a dad that says this. Everyone struggles with this because this is my reality. But then when you get older, you kind of are able to consciously look at things and be like, oh yeah, that wasn't necessarily normal. Not even normal, because there's no normal. I mean, the myth of normal, but you kind of look at it and you go like, oh, that wasn't healthy or good. But I think for most people, we have some sort of disorder with eating. If we have obesity, which is so crazy, we're unable to really nourish ourselves. We are all obsessed with food and nutrition in some weird way. So I think there's so much disorder in our eating. I wouldn't know in particular if I could say that someone has an eating disorder, if that makes sense.
Yeah. How should we, and I guess women specifically, be talking about food in the context of social media, but also in the context of, you know, their friend groups and their families, so as not to perpetuate the social contagion aspect of you know, disordered eating?
I would love to hear what you think about this. I think from my perspective, what I had to do in my journey was not talk about it at all. You know, and I think with the women that I hang out with, I mean, I'm hanging out with some of the most beautiful women in the world, just being in where I live and doing what I do. And so it's a conversation that's around a lot, and it's eating with a lot of really beautiful women. And so it can get really overwhelming if you're someone that struggles. But for me, not talking about it was the most helpful thing. Because if I'm going to every dinner and it's like, oh yeah, I'm not eating gluten, or did you eat that this week, or what diet are you on? You're kind of continuing that conversation. And then you're doing more comparison. You're like, she's eating this, she's not eating this. And it can just be front of mind. And so we know with most things in life, it's like, if we just focus our energy on something else, if I was able to focus my energy on building Almost 30 or finding my purpose or making myself a better person, then I'm having less energy to spend on thinking about food. So I stopped really thinking about it. I stopped talking about it. I stopped making it part of my life. And if anyone's followed Almost 30, we were wellness for a long time. We talked a lot about food and nutrition, and it just became something that wasn't negative to me, but it wasn't really serving me. Because at a point, you're just like, cool, we know what diet's happening, seed oils, like, okay, keto, like, you're just like, okay, there's more to life. There's living life. And I wanted to focus on like, how could I actually focus on loving myself enough to live my life and not be run and dictated by what I'm eating, if it's good, if it's bad, if I'm working out. Because I found more energy around food and nutrition caused me to be even more restrictive at points. Because I think for a lot of people that struggle, if you're focusing so much on like, okay, I'm doing a perfect day, lemon water, green juice, eggs, whatever your diet is, there's still that part of you that's like feeling restricted. And so you're going to probably binge eventually because you're trying to be either perfect or nothing. And so I wanted to find a place in the middle where I could just find peace with food. What do you think the conversation should be?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think, you know, I guess, yeah, one that's rooted in love, and that is not that's not dominated by shame.
Yes,
you know, shaming, feeling self. Yeah, I mean, if I go off the rails at dinner one night, which I do occasionally, and I'm happy to, because I tend to focus on food quality. So for me, going off the rails is like eating like
healthy pizza,
so much steak that I feel really kind of gross afterwards.
Yeah.
There is a degree of guilt that I feel about having eaten too much, but I guess it's not I'm not shaming myself as a result. Totally. I'm not like, you're not like,
Max, you piece of shit.
I'm not like harming myself with really negative self-talk or anything like that.
It's almost like you feel bad because your body physically feels bad.
Yeah.
I think that's for you. You're so in touch with your body physically that it's like if your body feels sick because you ate a lot of steak, you're like, oh, I'm sorry. You know what I mean? You're like, why did I?
It was really good, though. I mean, I had a really fantastic time in the process.
Yeah.
But like I'm paying the price.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So I try to be more mindful of that, like going into like a meal, like just in terms of not just how I want to feel during the meal and how indulgent or not I feel like being in that moment, but also like how I intend to feel afterwards as well.
Yes. I think that's a really good point about like how the conversation can be not shaming, not blaming, not making people feel guilty, not making them feel bad or wrong. And I'm not someone that's like, I don't really know if the conversation where you're like, eat Doritos, eat whatever, you know what I mean? Like liberate yourself from diet culture. Like that's not my vibe. But if we're really honest and truthful, like if we get clear of everything that's like happening in social media, all the messaging behind it, it's just simplicity that is the most nutritious, the most simple foods, the most simple practices. And so when we look on social media, we can be so overwhelmed because there's just so many people that are telling people what to do. And I also think that's sort of the problem is like people being told what to do, of how to eat, how to move, how to live their lives. And I've never felt like I knew what was best for anyone. I don't know what's best for anyone. That's not my life. And so when I can focus on what is best for my life, how can I focus on my own relationship with my body and food outside of what everyone else is doing? That's when I made the most progress, because I'm like, okay, what's going on with you, babe? Like if I love myself, if I want to mother myself and I want to be there for myself, I need to be like, okay, what do we need? We need to eat a really grounding a meal. We need to eat like something really blood sugar balancing. I need to have energy for this interview. Then it's more function and relational than like aesthetic or based on what someone else is telling me to do.
Yeah. How has your relationship with exercise changed over the years?
Oh my God. I used to be like workout girly. I think I was like a little bit trend based, if I'm honest. I think working out in college was like cardio only. Looking at my magazine, doing cardio for an hour, just trying to be thin, didn't really want any definition, just really thin in that moment. And then after college, kind of like when ClassPass came around, that was like huge as a movement of getting people involved in workout classes. I don't think we did workout classes the way we do now. Like people do multiple workout classes a week. I do them now. And I was doing tons of Soul Cycle. I was doing tons of HIIT, like just really doing my thing, and got to a point where I just had like adrenal fatigue and just really burnt out from all the workouts, and now had to find like a really balanced place now where I move in a way that feels really good. I move in a way that builds muscle. I move in a way that supports my body intuitively, more so than like I need to do 5 HIIT workouts a week because that's what will make me thin. So if we think about intention again, my intention before when I was doing all the HIIT workouts wasn't like, oh, body, how are you feeling? Like, are you tired? Did you have a hard week? Like, what's happening? It was like, I'm going to schedule out HIIT workouts for the next 2 weeks, regardless of how I felt. I think that's a huge thing, is I think in our over-scheduled culture, we can schedule our workouts for the next weeks, which can be helpful at the beginning of your health journey to keep you accountable and to have something that forms your schedule. But at a point, you also need to be in touch with what your body needs. And if I'm scheduling my workouts for weeks in advance of doing 5 HIIT workouts a week, I'm not like checking in like, oh, my back kind of hurts today. I should probably not work out. So being intuitive, being mindful, and also doing way more strength training, way more weights, way more balance in what I'm doing, and usually walking a lot more than doing like high intensity stuff.
How do you think about resistance training? Because I mean, inevitably, when you're building muscle, you might be inclined to see the scale go up.
I know.
Right? But the scale going up is not a response to fat storage. It's a response to your body getting stronger.
Yeah. So I think that's a whole mental game women need to have. Like, I really respect and honor the women that like on Instagram or whatever, they're like fit, spo girlies that are super jacked, because that's a whole different frame of thinking. And it also can be its own disorder. Do you know what I mean? But for me in my journey, like I think when I moved to LA, actually I built a lot of muscle that also also probably put on some fat that like now has sort of balanced out. But now it's just like my idea and perspective of why I'm building muscle isn't just for weight. So if I'm going into my fitness and I'm like, I want to look a certain way, it's all about my weight, then I'm probably going to freak out. But my mindset now is like, I want to feel really good in my clothes. Like I want to have a healthy metabolism. I want to have a healthy posture. I want to have like good like sculpting to my body. Like once you see what muscle building does to your body from like a sculpting perspective, you're like, oh my God, this is so dope. But I had to figure out a way to like love my body enough to like let go of the reins a little bit and see its function over its form so that I could build that muscle.
Have you been able to untether your, I'm sure it's a constant work in progress, but your sense of self-worth from the scale?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love myself so much now. It's so amazing. And that comes from, I don't say that lightly, and it comes from a place of suffering. You know, I've really figured out who I was through suffering. And I'm sure you can relate through the situation you went through with your mom was incredibly painful, traumatic, hard. And you also, it made you who you are. You know, it sculpts you into the person that, you know, God creator wants you to be. So as someone that loves myself enough, I don't no longer define myself by what I look like and by my scale. And that happened through years of hard times, years of struggles, and then really coming back to a place where I could always have my back and I could always make the decision that was right for me, even when it was hard. Like my divorce is an example. It's a really hard decision to do that. It's a really hard decision to make the choice to leave a relationship that's safe and that was good in a lot of ways. But when you choose yourself, you're like, oh, no matter how hard this is, I'm going to make the decision that makes the most sense for me and my soul. Like I have my own back, even if it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I love that. I don't really pay much attention to, I was like looking at the scale back when I was doing
Can I guess how much you weigh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Excited to hear what you think.
Well, because I guess 200 grams of protein, I was thinking you would do 1 gram per 1 pound.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah.
So I'm thinking 192.
Close. Yeah, like probably high 180s, like 186.
Okay.
Yeah. Trying to go up though. Trying to like put
So
on.
I'm your goal weight. I was guessing your goal weight.
Yeah,
your
pretty much.
weight.
Pretty much.
So your scale relationship.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I have a good, I actually don't put any stock in what the scale says, you know. I go to a gym where I have this bioelectrical impedance device that gives me, it'll tell me, you know, a rough estimate of my body fat percentage, you know, so I like to keep tabs on that.
Yep.
But I mainly, you know, for me, progress is getting stronger and seeing my lifts increase and liking what I see, you know, in the mirror day in and day out.
And that matters. And it is, again, so if we think about the scale just from the highest level perspective, you know, my relationship with the scale wasn't toxic. Like I wouldn't say that I was like a scale girl where I was like every day I'm like, what's going on with the scale? But I definitely saw the scale as an indicator for how I feel about myself. But the scale's not the problem. It's what the story I'm telling myself that the scale is telling me. So if I'm up 2 pounds, that's just telling me the facts of my life. But if I'm like, oh man, that means I'm a horrible person, that means I'm not lovable, that means I'm unworthy, that's the problem. So we need to look at the thoughts behind it, the stories behind everything, rather than being like the scale is the issue, the scale is the problem. No, it's like reality is not the problem. Our relationship to reality is.
Couldn't agree more. A lot of women from just the interviews that I've had with women, this is not something that I have lived personal experience with, but will tend to, you know, consume lots of like salads, lots of like greens and things like that, under-consume protein, animal source foods, because they believe, wrongly I think, that protein foods will cause, you know, a person to gain weight, be bigger and the like, that salads are more feminine. You know, things like that. Do you have any thoughts there in terms, you know, particularly as your diet has changed? Through the years?
I'm definitely, you know, Gabrielle Lyon, our guru and expert around the protein, which is she's so helpful in the science. But I think when we think about food and if we think about salads, it is like a fear of having density and a fear of having like enough food to feel satiated and connected to our body. And so what I realized for a lot of women that are like so worried about gaining weight or being fat or not being thin, they will eat foods that are like that. They will eat really light, airy foods because they don't want to actually feel what it feels like to be full. I've seen that so much in LA. Like, it's just, they want to eat the lightness in the thing because the feeling of full is uncomfortable. Like, so many women right now will be like, I'm so bloated. And whether that's like an actual health issue of them feeling bloated or they just are full from a meal, we'll never know. But my relationship with protein, it's interesting because my dad was someone that went to Arnold. He was like working out my whole life. He's super fit, like always lifted. So I always was like a protein girly. Like, I remember in high school, I was like working out at the gym, eating protein, all the things. So protein, having enough protein was never my thing. It was like, how can I control every other thing about my nutrition, and how can I work out so much to overcompensate if I was overeating? But I do feel like there was a long period in time where it wasn't protein, it wasn't carbs, it wasn't fat, it was calories. That was sort of the indoctrination that I had, where it was like, how can I reduce all of my calories? But now I usually have, around 90 to 100 grams of protein a day, from fish, from whatever sources that I use. And it just feels so good and satiating. And I've noticed such a difference in my body composition. I've noticed such a difference in my blood, in my like insulin levels, and my relationship to like even just mental clarity. It's been so good.
I love that. Yeah, having a healthy relationship with food, to me, it's so.
You're so lucky.
Yeah,
a lot more men have an easier relationship with food, and it's so lucky.
Yeah, although disordered eating is on the rise in men.
It is. Due
to the same societal pressures, social media, these like really unrealistic body image standards that social media has helped to perpetuate.
And I think too, it's like, I think about this a lot. Like, I remember in high school when we had photos developed, and I remember seeing a photo of me, and I was like, this is me. And I just couldn't believe it. Like, I was like, because you look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, oh yeah, I'm fine or whatever. We have photos and videos taken of us all day, every day. So we're constantly like looking at something. And because everyone's online, you have this constant reminder of how you look like. And that's why plastic surgery is up so much, because it's like, you're always on a screen, on Zoom, on FaceTime. You're always being mirrored back how you look. So it can be so hard. And I do feel like a lot of the disordered eating too is a lot to do because of our food system, and because if so many of us are eating just processed shit food, you're never satiated, you're never full, you never feel good, you never feel nourished. So you're always going to want more and more and more and more and more, and you'll never feel satisfied by what you're eating. So it actually makes sense that you would overeat, or you'd binge, or you'd do all these weird things about food, because the food that you're consuming isn't actually like nutritionally satisfying you.
Right. Yeah, 100%. There's a study that
let's drop a study, baby.
Let's drop
Took
a study.
too long.
Yeah. No, there's a study that is often invoked, in the nutrition spheres these days, because it was a really seminal study that showed, it was NIH funded, that when people eat ultra processed foods to a point of satiety, they've already overconsumed. They've already tipped that energy balance in the favor of an energy surplus by about 500 additional calories. Whereas when you give the same people, it was like a crossover study, minimally processed whole foods to eat, they will eat them to the same degree of satiety. So they're not limiting themselves. They're eating to a point of fullness, and yet they come in just under actually a point of energy balance to a calorie deficit of about 300 calories. But again, they're full, they're satiated, right? So it's like by the time you've consumed ultra-processed foods to a point of satiety, you've already overconsumed them. So if you want to walk around feeling full and sated, then it really helps to prioritize minimally processed whole foods in your diet.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's huge.
And there's also a bunch of data and research around the relationship between your space and your satiety levels. So if you have a space that is cluttered, if you have a space that is messy, if you have a space that is dimly lit, if you have a space that is like just full of stuff, you're more likely to overeat, because your body is like subconsciously processing the entire space as well. And so you're not going to get the hunger cues as much. So I think in our consumerist society too, we have so much. We just are like over everything. We have fast fashion, we have clothes, we have Amazon, we have all these things. So we're just not in touch with our hunger cues and our relationship with understanding when we're full.
Yeah, you throw into the mix like distraction.
Yes.
Our constant
eating
distraction
on your phone, having YouTube on, like we're just always constantly connected to that, and we're not connecting to our bodies.
Yeah. I mean, when I eat generally to a point of satiety. Like I eat until I'm full. I eat dinner until I'm full.
Watching anything or?
I mean, no, I don't actually I don't eat while watching TV. That's something I never do. I will, if I'm eating alone, I'll use my phone while I'm eating.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But because I've hedged in a way, because my diet is primarily at this point comprised of whole foods, it really doesn't have an impact. So I eat until I'm full. Yeah. I don't limit myself. And it leads, it allows me to maintain a body composition that I'm happy with.
Yeah.
My body fat percentage probably fluctuates by a few percentage points here and there, but in general, like I'm on autopilot at this point, and I don't feel like I restrict, other than I do my best to limit my exposure to like ultra processed foods. Because like you can,
when you love yourself, it doesn't feel like restriction.
Yeah. And foods that are highly processed and snacks that are highly processed, I mean, you can just like eat and eat and eat and eat, and you never get full, That's so much in life.
I think about that from the macro level. Like you have that ultra processed foods that just doesn't feed you anything. And I think about that with like media or relationships or things that we do. Like we engage in so much activity and relationships and conversations and media that doesn't feed us at all.
Yeah.
Like what is actually sustaining you? Is it your connection to God, creator? Is it your connection to earth? Is it your connection to your child? Is it your connection to your loved one? Like that is what sustains us, in life. And there's just so much blah shit around us that we're just kind of focused on.
We live in an ultra processed world.
Yeah, it's so true.
Ultra processed information.
Yeah.
Ultra processed relationships.
It's so true. And it's all just, we're so disconnected. So we think that it's feeding us, but it's not. And I had to really find a relationship with like a foundational relationship with God or like creator, whatever people want to call it, just that one singular source of like my foundation, to be like, okay, if all else, this.
Were you raised in a religious household?
I was raised Catholic, baby.
You were?
Were you?
Raised Jewish.
Okay.
My parents were religious, and they did my mom in particular did her best to instill an appreciation.
I love the Jewish faith. There's such cool aspects to it.
Yeah, but I was never, for as long as I could remember, I never, there was always a disconnect between the Jewish tradition for me, which I highly value and very much appreciate being a part of, and like the spiritual component. Spiritually, I've always kind of looked elsewhere. Organized religion has never really been my thing.
Same.
But
it's really damaging to people's relationship with God or whatever.
I used to think that. I used to be more militantly like
say more
anti-organized religion, but I also kind of, I kind of think that, as I've gotten older, I do think that it provides a really invaluable actually service for people,
Yeah, I wouldn't know because I wouldn't know the other way because I had that. You know what I mean? So it's something that I'm open to exploring. I think just for me, it removed me from the belief that I could have a relationship with something outside of the church. It felt like the pathway to. And so when I was able to find a relationship with God, creator, whatever, outside of it, I was like, oh, this actually is for me. It's my relationship. And when you can discover spirituality and your spiritual practice and your way of being outside of anyone telling you what to do, it just becomes really beautiful. And we could also take that with food and nutrition. It's just this like dogma. It's these like black and white ideologies. It's tons of information. It's tons of hoops to jump through. It's disconnection from what's actually going to work for you and your body. Spirituality is the same way. You need to figure out what works for you and your relationship to yourself. It doesn't need to look like anyone else. And so it just always kind of comes back to like all of the noise, all of the fluff, all of the processing. How can you come back to like you, what works for you, what's going to work for your life, and make you the happiest, healthiest you can be?
Damn, I love that. Is this the happiest you've ever been?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. And it's the hardest year of my life was last year. And I think that's what contributed to it, is just helping me really cultivate and craft the person that I want to be. And when you have like all things that you thought were sure in your life, my dad is really sick. I got divorced. I went through various things that were just kind of the big things that can happen in your life. And then you're like, oh no, that's not going to break me. It's going to make me better, and it's going to make me more clear on what matters in my life. It just is such an amazing feeling. And I often feared suffering. I think so many of us fear suffering. We feel like it's never going to end. We're like, when is this pain going to end? You know, when you have a feeling, you start to feel, you're crying or you're emoting, you're like, dude, when is this going to be over? I'm so scared it's never going to end. But when you can go through that whole process and be like, oh, it can get better, and I can have a better relationship with change or suffering and use it to my advantage, use it to love myself more, use it to crystallize my values, use it to figure out what's meaningful to me, it can be like such an asset for you. Because we don't really find out who we are or love ourselves when things aren't really happening, when nothing's happening.
When things are going well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, your mom's situation made you who you are.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah, we were talking offline about all the various moments that occur, you know, in this when a loved one is ill, where it's like you just can't believe that you're going through this. You can't believe they're going through it. You can't believe you're going through it. And then on the other side, you can't believe that you went through it.
Yeah.
You know, if you're able to make it out on the other side in one piece without being, you know, a drug addict or an alcoholic or some other, you know, having undertaken some other, you know, dysfunctional.
Yeah. I'm curious
lifestyle.
for you. This has been an interesting part of my path with my father. So my dad has Parkinson's and now Alzheimer's. He's had Parkinson's for like 5 years now. The Alzheimer's is new. And I'm curious if you and your mom journey, like, did you ever have a moment where you're like, oh, you're a person and not my mom? Because I think that's also a part of it that I'm so in awe. I'm like, oh my God, this is happening to me and my life and my dad. And I've sort of had to see him now as a person and not like my dad archetype because they need help. Like, what was your journey with that?
Yeah, I mean, especially when you become like a caregiver,
Yeah.
you know, a caregiver for the person who is always supposed to be your caregiver. You know, it's very difficult. It's a complete flip of the script, and it's really hard. And I think it's actually an important milestone for life
In adulthood.
and adulthood, yeah. And it's really unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, that is kind of what happens. You know, at first it's about recognizing that your parents are not perfect, infallible beings, omnipotent, all-knowing,
which is so heartbreaking.
beings. Yeah, that your parents, you know, even the best parent is not a quote unquote perfect parent. Like, everybody makes mistakes. Especially now seeing my you know, because I just became an uncle for the first time. My little brother, about a year and a half ago, had a baby. They're literally, my brother is still just a kid, you know.
Isn't that wild, dude?
Just trying
You're
to
like, you are raising a baby? I think about that with my friends. I'm like, what?
Yeah. It's actually shocking when you realize how far you've come as an adult, you know, and just how chaotic and crazy the world can be, and how ultimately you were the product of just a couple of kids, you know. A
lot of us, you know, and like from a psychology perspective, it's called the parentified child. Have you heard of that?
No.
So a lot of the people of our generation, children of our generation, grew up with parents that essentially weren't able to be caregivers in a lot of ways. They weren't able to emotionally attune with the child. They weren't able to provide for their emotional needs. And in some cases, they weren't able to provide for their physical needs. They weren't able to like feed them, clothe them, bathe them. So what happens from a young age, the child becomes a parentified child, where the child realizes it's so unsafe that they have to become the parent in the situation and parent the parents. And so that even happened a little bit in my household, where I had mental health issues. My parents struggled, and they were really unable to be parents. And so they were unable to regulate their emotions. They were unable to like be stable. They were unable to attune. They were unable to be present. So I at a young age was like, oh my God, I have to be attuning to my mom or meeting her needs, because that's how I feel safe. That's how I survive. So for a lot of people, as the parentified children, you have to really unlearn those patterns of like attuning to people's needs, self-abandonment, prioritizing everyone else before you, so that you can actually become the person that you're meant to be. Yeah,
it sounds similar to the concept of covert incest. Have you heard of that? Yeah, that's some shit. Covert incest is basically like when a parent makes you essentially their surrogate partner. It has nothing to do with sex, but it's, you know, so it's not physical.
100%. That's happening all the time.
Yeah, it's happening all the time.
All the time. That's, you know, the concept of the devouring mother.
No.
Jordan Peterson talks about it.
No.
It's like an archetype, essentially. So the devouring mother is essentially covert incest in a lot of ways. It's like the mother that is over-controlling, overbearing, overcompensating, just kind of like insidiously in the child's life in a way that feels constrictive, in a way that feels like they're having their needs met through that relationship with the child. I think with a lot of men, they can have the mothers will become pseudo-wives to them. They'll become the pseudo-husband in a lot of ways. And I think that's also what's contributing to, and culturally, what's happening from a dating perspective, from just a cultural perspective, where men are avoidant, men feel like they don't want to commit, men feel like they don't want to be with one woman, because most of them, their lives, they had a mother that was having her emotional needs met through a child. That feels suffocating, that feels overwhelming, that's wrong to do that. And so when they get close to intimacy and relationships, they're like, oh, I don't want that. That's going to be like my mom, like on me, like I don't want that.
Yeah, well, it feels like I don't want that because it can feel like that. Like I don't want that because that feels like too close to home, but it could also feel like you're betraying your mom.
That's a really good one.
Or the parent who has made you their target of this covert incest, which can be a little bit more, which I think can be more subtle than this sort of overreaching, overbearing parent. Like in the case of my mom, which I discovered over my therapy journey, like my mom, I mean, she was like definitely protective and overbearing, but I don't think to a pathologic degree. But she did share things with me about her marriage that were probably better shared to a best friend or to her therapist at the time, that she instead shared with me, as the oldest child in the family, the one that was like closest to her. My mom would share things about her marriage that she shouldn't have, and so that I think has made relationships
shape you.
Yeah, well, it's made relationships challenging for me.
Yeah. Speak on it, brother.
Yeah. I mean, I think for a long time I had like what I would describe as like an avoidant attachment style. But as you kind of alluded to earlier, I don't know how, I think attachment styles are really interesting, and it's great to kind of have this vocabulary, almost like yoga. Like it's great to know how to speak in a new vocabulary with which to describe your inner world, but to the degree that 100%. You don't allow it to limit you and to define you,
Yes. Stop.
Yeah.
Everybody. You have to find out what you are and then find out how to move beyond it.
Yeah.
So find out you're avoidant. Okay, I'm avoidant. I'm recognizing this pattern. How can I move beyond it?
Or maybe you're avoidant in certain contexts,
exactly.
but not others,
It's a dance. You might be, because I know you can, and most people with their attachments, you can oscillate between anxious and avoidant.
Yeah.
Because what you're anxious because you want the attachment, and then when you have it, it doesn't feel natural to have it, so then you avoid, and it feels overwhelming because you're not used to having a consistent attachment over time.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I've been avoidant for a long time with many women, but
do you think that was related to like feeling deep intimacy with your mom and then feeling like the loss of her was too much?
Yeah, for sure. I think, in a way it would feel subconsciously, of course. It's never conscious. Like I wouldn't, it's not like I was with women and I would feel like consciously that I was cheating on my mom by being with them. That's
You're
not
like, I can't do this.
No, but
my mom's going to be pissed.
It disallows you to form strong bonds with women and to be vulnerable and to, at least in my case. But, that's something that just the awareness of it has kind of released me from many of those, or I feel like allowed me to at least progress beyond it and get better and become more secure. I'm not saying that I'm fully secure now, but I'm definitely, I seem to be trending in that direction anyway.
You do.
So
you're doing great.
Yeah.
And that's so deep and vulnerable. And I'm so grateful that you shared that, because it's not easy to share, to be like, hey, I've been avoidant with women. Like, we're public figures. This is a public platform. You know what I mean? Like, and I think for a lot of men, that's just very natural and normal. Like, it's almost like feminine naturally to be anxious, to be like, oh my God, I want more from him. And I also think that's because of, so if we think about the mother, you have the covert incest in a lot of ways. You have the devouring mother. The mothers are kind of over-functioning, overbearing. And the fathers, for a lot of us, weren't around. They worked most of the week. They came home late. They might have been around on weekends, but they're doing housework. They're doing something for the mom. So they're not super present. I loved my dad. I still love my dad. He's amazing, but he wasn't around a lot. And so what I had of our connection was very rare, but when we had it, I loved it. So I've realized too that like my perception of men is that I have to be a certain way, but also that, I would always want more from our connection. And it's not like I'm working on this. I'm not insane, but I noticed there was a little bit of anxiousness when a man was being avoidant because I'm so used to my dad just wanting more of our connection. So I think a lot of us can oscillate with the attachments, and I think it's all about being aware but not defining yourself, not going to your first date and being like, well, I'm anxious attachment and, I'm parentified child and I'm someone that's, got this kind of trauma. It's like, no, like we learn these things to move beyond them, not to have it define ourselves.
Yeah, they should be looked at as tools, I think.
Yeah.
More than anything
would
else.
you share that with a partner? Would you ever be like, hey, I'm anxious or I'm avoidant. Would you call me out if I'm doing this?
Yeah, well, with the right partner.
Okay.
Because the right partner should be willing to acknowledge their own
100%.
Their own challenges.
Yeah.
Right? So
I think that's powerful. And I think you can pull up, it's like helpful in relationship to be like, hey, I'm noticing you're kind of like being a little avoidant right now. Like what's coming up for you?
Yeah.
Like, can you tell me a little bit more about how you're feeling? And that's been really beautiful in my dating journey, just to be like, because I love men. I love being in relationship with men. Like I love partnership. So it's been beautiful to be in relationship with men where I can be like, hey, like, is this what's happening? Like I'm noticing this thing, what's coming up, and not be so like, oh my God, that means you don't like me. That means you don't. In the anxious, you'll do anything for the attachment. You'll do anything for the connection. So you'll like self-abandon, you'll say whatever, you'll call them a lot, you know what I mean? And when you can be confident and secure, you can be like, yo, I'm noticing this, like what's going on for you? Like how can I help?
Yeah, totally. And the brain, just loves to write a narrative.
Oh my God, loves the story.
Yeah, loves the story.
Loves the story.
Loves the story.
That's why I love Byron Katie's The Work, the 4 questions. Is this true? Can I absolutely know this is true? What if I felt the opposite? And then what's the 4th one? Like, it's like, what if the opposite was true? And then how would that make me feel?
Ooh.
So in the case of like with an anxious attachment, you could say, he's not answering my calls because he doesn't like me and because I was too much last night on our date and because I was a bad kisser and all these things. And then you can say with Byron Katie's The Work, like, is that true? And you can be like, well, no. Do you know that's true? No, I don't know that's true. What if you felt like the opposite was true? He thinks I'm amazing. He really likes me. He's going to call me back. This is all going to happen. And then how would that make you feel? That makes you feel relieved. It makes you feel really good. And I think we always have to question our narratives because we can have so many that can just run our whole lives into the ground if we're not mindful.
Yeah. Yeah, you always have to be able to step back and take a meta view. And I think, the more you can cultivate awareness around the tendency of your brain to create a story.
Yes.
And that stories are not truth, right?
Yes.
Feelings are not facts.
Yeah.
That the better off you'll be, the more secure you'll feel, right?
I think that's where consciousness comes in, where you can pull up out of your stories. Because a lot of people have stories running that they don't even know are running. Like, I'm not enough, I'm unworthy, I'm a loser, I'm not successful, this person doesn't like me, no one will ever, until you're able to meditate or practice mindfulness, you can't peel back and look at your stories. And that's honestly like the foundation of my entire spiritual growth journey or my personal growth journey started with meditation. It started with the ability to witness myself. Ooh, how am I being with this person? How am I being in this relationship? How am I being at work? Does this feel good for me? What do I want for my life? You have to have that perspective, or you're just running old programs that were set for you by your parents from the ages 0 to 7.
Do you have an ongoing meditation practice?
Yeah, every day.
Every day?
Yeah.
Wow.
For my every day. It's the best. Do you?
So impressive. No. I was trained. I paid a lot of money and took a course.
TM.
Yeah, it was like a sort of TM. And I did it, I've done it on and off. I've kind of like, I like to say I'll be able to, I can dose myself as needed.
Right.
If I need a break, I know how to meditate, which I think it's important to know how to meditate.
Yeah. What's your mental landscape like though normally?
Well, I would say it's pretty
healthy,
regulated.
regulated.
Yeah. I surround myself with brilliant women you know, who I can get emotional support from.
Including Delilah,
my four-legged cat.
You do.
Baby.
You have a good counsel.
Yeah, and I do, and I do give a lot of credit to the women in my life. You know, like whether it's Sydney, who works for me.
Yeah, she's the best.
Yeah, or my fantastic friends, you and others in our friend group. But yeah, having good women and like and also like insightful, vulnerable men.
I mean, I just am so grateful.
Important.
You know, part of your community, the men like you, and this new wave of men that are emotionally intelligent and vulnerable. Obviously, there's ways to go. Mm-hmm. We're not perfect, but is just so profoundly further than we used to be. Like you being able to be like, yeah, I'm avoidant and like I'm working on it is huge.
Yeah.
Like most men are like, fuck that bitch. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. It's really great to be able to be self-aware, take an inventory, and also cultivate the language.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole thing.
With which to like understand your inner world, you know.
Men don't have a lot of language. It actually breaks my heart.
Yeah.
That's like, oh man, that hurts me the reason why I would be perceived as emotionally mature or perceived as processed or healed or regulated is a lot because I have a vocabulary to describe how I'm feeling. When women are together in circles, honey, do you even understand? It is like, oh, I feel this texture of sadness, but it's also met with this expansive quality of excitement for our like you're just wordsmithing. And it can sometimes make us insane, to be honest, because we're just going in circles. But men like don't have the vocabulary and words to describe how they're feeling, which can make it really hard to connect with people and be understood by the world.
Yeah, having a rich vocabulary is so important in so many areas of life. And it's just crazy that we're now just starting to see its value in terms of understanding our, the more emotional realms as well. You know, it's like if you have like shoulder pain, right? Doesn't it help to be able to identify if it's in your medial delt, rear delt, anterior, and that's just an example. Like I did yoga for many years and I thought yoga was a really fantastic new acquired vocabulary with which to like understand my body. Like if I'm sore or like feeling tight in a certain realm, well, yoga gave me the vocabulary to know how to stretch a certain part of my body, and so
I love that.
Having all these tools in your toolkit from an emotional standpoint only help you to better kind of understand how to unravel and manage and ultimately improve like the
quality of your life.
The quality of your life, yeah.
And your relationships.
And your relationships, yeah. Given your own unique like background.
Yeah, I've been obsessed with recently just feeling into the importance of communication for everything in life. And it seems simple. It's kind of like, yeah, of course you've got to communicate. But if we think about communication as it relates to the desire to have deep, intimate relationships, like for us to feel connected, it has to be like, I love you. That helps people feel connected. Like you are so meaningful to me. Like this relationship is so special. That's what helps us feel connected. Obviously it's our body language, it's our energy between us, but then it's also like being able to navigate conflict. That's huge. That's communication. Being able to be like, oh, I love you so much, but this is really bothering me and triggering me.
Yeah.
I'd love to see where we can go from here. And when people, and especially men, don't have the tools to like express how they're feeling, whether it's good or bad, they can feel really alone and isolated. And the woman can feel that anxious feeling of like, I want more. I'm trying to understand, but he's having a hard time expressing because he can't really communicate. And then she's over communicating, overdoing it. And it's just like this recipe for disaster.
Leave us with like a reading list, maybe some of the more transformative books or not necessarily even just books, but like pieces of content that you think.
That's a good one.
Yeah, might help both from the standpoint of, relationships as we've just been discussing, but also like,
food stuff.
Yeah, food stuff.
All right, guys, get your little Amazon carts ready. Get your pens down. For food, I love Janine Roth. She's really powerful. She's more psycho-spiritual relationship with food. One of her books called Women, Food, and God is just incredible. I love all of her work around our relationship with food and our body. I also really love for relationships, Conscious Loving is a really beautiful book on relationships. Calling in the One is a good book if you're calling in the one, but also how to be in relationships. I think Gabor Mate's The Myth of Normal is really good when we're thinking about attachment. We're thinking about how we grew up. We're thinking about sort of the landscape of how we feel today. And then what else is like a groundbreaking one in relationships? And I think those are a good start. I think those are a really good start. Oh, also No Bad Parts, which is a book by Dick Schwartz, the founder of Internal Family Systems, which is the psychotherapy technique I taught about at the beginning, is such a helpful guide for understanding parts.
I love that. Krista, you are such a light.
We did it.
We did it. Thank you for coming in.
I'm a light. That's why I wear yellow.
Yeah. So great.
This is amazing.
Brilliant.
You
powerful.
guys, next time we'll get deeper with Max about dating, because I know you guys, that's all you ask. Literally in my Q&A box, I'm like, hey guys, what do you want to know from Max? I'm like, is he single? Is he dating?
Oh God, my avoidant spidey sense is tingling.
I know, that's okay. That's normal. You deserve to have a private life.
Is it?
Yes. Don't you think?
It doesn't have to be that private.
Okay.
I kind of like being an open book, but I guess we'll save that for round 2.
Okay.
Yeah?
We'll go full in. We'll have her come.
Okay, yes, sounds good.
We'll do therapy.
Last question, but before we get to that, where can people find you on social media?
I'm on Instagram. It's Krista. It's ITSKRISTA. I do retreats. I work with people one-on-one. And I do speaking stuff. And then I have Almost 30, almost30.com, Almost 30 podcast on Instagram and TikTok. It's a podcast on spirituality and wellness. My boy has been on a few times that I do with my best friend. And it's Krista.com.
Love it. What does living a genius life mean to you?
Living a genius life means to me that I'm friends with Max Lugavere, and I can only think about Max when I hear that question.
Yay, I love that.
That's like literally, I'm like, it's just, I'm like, oh, that's Max's slogan in life.
Slogan.
It's a slogan. That's what I have to say about that. Living a genius life is listening to the Genius Life podcast and buying your Genius Life books and being your damn self.
Aw, love you so much. Thanks for coming out. You're the best. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.